Welcome to this month's CFX Connections webinar. My name is Stephanie Lippy. I'm the Conference Manager for the Church Facilities Conference and Expo. Today we're hosting a webinar on achieving church AV excellence. During this webinar, we encourage you to use the chat options down below to let us know where you're watching from and to share your thoughts on what is being presented. Also, if you have a question or that you would like to have answered, please click on the raise your hand icon, or you can include it in the chat discussions, and we'll address it as we have time. Please note that all links to resources that are discussed in this webinar can be found on our website at www.churchfacilitiesexpo.com/webinars. A recording of today's webinar will be shared with each registrant in a few days. And I'm going to bring Tim Adams up here now. I think he's going to be, yep, there he is. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
It's my pleasure today to introduce all of you to Tim. Serving in church tech ministry as a volunteer for over 20 years, Tim offers a unique perspective born from the week in, week out struggles facing church techs. He started in audio, learned video, and then lighting, and finally projection. Mostly self-taught out of necessity. I think a lot of us have been there at some point in time. Tim is a lifelong student, always pushing for excellence rather than perfection, and is deeply passionate about church AV. Welcome, Tim, and thank you for presenting this discussion topic with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Oh, look, we've got somebody from Columbia, South Carolina. I love it already. Thank you. Welcome. All right, let's go ahead and we'll start off. Tim, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Sure. So my name, again, is Tim Adams. I'm the owner of a company called Tomato Systems. And you'll notice that, I don't know, you popped up this thing popped up on my screen. I'm not sure if I can, oh, there we go. All right, so Tomato Systems, you'll notice it's a play on my name, Tim. It's actually something that's been with me since 8th grade, honestly. Okay. It's kind of a shortening of my first and last name. So Tim Adams, Tim A, Tomato. So the company was founded in 2016, but don't let that fool you. I've been doing church tech since 1995, where I started in the tape ministry at my church, and it's this tiny little booth, and it's all foamed up with sound isolation, and we're recording the tape, if you guys remember that. Some of you younger guys may not, but yeah, we actually had tape cassettes. And then that was more or less freshman year in high school. So throughout high school, I learned what we now call front of house. So that would be the live sound, the position that is, the mixer for the house sound. Excuse me. And then that led into a discussion about, we want to get a video ministry going. And so having gotten an introduction into video in high school, I said, well, I want to be involved in that. And so from building that, from the equipment, from the wiring, basically from the ground up, about 6 years in, so that started in 2000, about 2006, we went through an upgrade to high definition. So that again was from a ground up. We had to replace all the wiring, the switcher, the monitors, the cameras, everything. And, that may not sound like a big deal now, but in 2006, that was a really big deal. I had to learn about things like Genlock and SDI, and because I didn't know, we were running on S video, consumer grade S video, not YC. So that was an education.
Oh, I bet.
And 2007, I was asked to participate in a 5-year evangelistic effort with a kind of a regional organization. So the idea is we were going to create 2 reaping series a year, or a quarter. No, a year. Yeah, I got it right. And we needed somebody to tackle lighting. We had an audio engineer, we had a video engineer, we had a producer. So we had the other areas covered. We just needed somebody to tackle lighting. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. Why not? So we have a local professional lighting place here in the Portland area. And I basically lived there for about 2 months, just asking questions, absorbing, learning what I could. And while that gave me a really good foundation, what really taught me what I know now is doing it. And, they say there's no teacher like experience, right? And so, I learned about lighting angles. I learned about the different lighting fixtures and that kind of thing. And then, most recently, now that I've started Tomato Systems, projection has become a kind of a big thing. And so I had to learn about, foot Lambert measurements and throw distances and lensing options. And, we now have laser projectors, and that's a whole new ball game. So a lot of what I've learned has been self-taught, out of necessity, but also curiosity. I like what I like, and I see that there is a fairly large need in smaller churches. And by smaller, I'm talking like 500 members or below, which statistically represents 80% of churches in America. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of the big integration houses or consultants, installers, they tend to not pay that much attention to that level of church. And so that's a natural niche for me. I have a real passion for smaller churches simply because of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, which is they really struggle for a number of reasons to achieve excellence in their audiovisual. And I really want to spread the message that not only can you achieve it, but you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment in order to achieve that. So I've consulted with churches around the world. You can see the countries there, all over the US. And I currently write regularly for Technologies for Worship magazine and projectorcentral.com. In fact, I have a projector showing up later today, that I'm going to be doing a review on, a Panasonic. So pretty excited about that.
Very cool. I love how you're talking about how there's no teacher like experience, but I think something else to always consider is the fact that everything in the world of tech is really interconnected. I mean, if you're not understanding your audio, your lighting kind of doesn't, it all really does go together, and you have to have at least a basic understanding of all of that to really do your job.
Well, especially now that we have something called convergence that's happening, and that is, more and more technical systems are now being put on a network, which means, now you have to understand network topology and TCP/IP and how that all relates, IP addresses, subnet masks, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. So much craziness and chaos all comes together to make it work really well.
Exactly.
All right. So as you and I were talking before we started getting into this, you were mentioning to me that you have something called foundational planning that is kind of the cornerstone of your whole process. Can you tell us a little bit about what foundational purchasing?
Purchasing. There you go.
Can you tell us a little more about what foundational purchasing is and how it can help churches in their technological purchases?
Absolutely. So the idea of foundational purchasing really came about from my direct experience, again, with small churches, and this pattern that I noticed happening. And that is, because we're focusing on bottom line price, spend as least the smallest amount possible, we have a tendency to buy inferior stuff and inferior equipment. And what that means is you don't get the longevity, you don't get the flexibility or the functionality necessarily that you really need. And that particularly leads to a lot of compromise that in a lot of cases you shouldn't be compromising on. So this pattern of we're buying pieces of equipment over and over and over and over again for a variety of reasons. Whereas if you can identify what the cornerstone pieces of equipment are for each of your technical systems, then you will understand, or you will achieve the longevity and the return on investment that you really should be getting when it comes to making technical purchases. There are, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but there are corners that can be cut in terms of equipment that you can buy and that will work. But you're not going to know where those corners are without the experience. And a lot of times we're dealing with, I mean, most of the time we're dealing with volunteers that are undertrained. They don't know what they don't know. But the leadership puts them in charge of, and we'll talk about this later. I just a heads up on that. Mm-hmm. But they put them in charge of putting together proposals and saying, okay, this is the equipment that we need. And it's kind of like asking a plumber to build your house. It's not their skill set. And just really quickly, we have a tendency as leaders in churches, church boards, however you want to classify that, mm-hmm. of approaching people that have some kind of technical background or skill set, right? Oh, they know computers, so that automatically translates that they're going to understand digital audio mixers and video switchers and matrices, projection. No, mm-hmm. that's not a direct correlation. It can help them pick up on that, but proper training is needed. So the idea of foundational purchasing is to focus on long-term ROI versus short-term gains. And what that does mean is that you have to be willing and you have to understand that you are going to spend more on these cornerstone pieces of equipment. But you also understand that 10 years down the road, that equipment's still going to be operating and still going to be functioning. Mm-hmm. But the other part of foundational purchasing is that you need to plan for 10 years down the road. And so what that means is you're not buying a piece of equipment that is, say, an audio mixer. I think I've got another slide here. Yeah, so we'll get into this in a second. But you're asking yourself, 10 years down the road, where is our church going to be? Where's our ministry going to be? Where is our mission going to be? What's the vision for that? Mm-hmm. And then you buy the equipment based on that, not on your current needs, because that's where a lot of churches get in trouble. They say, oh, well, we only need 16 channels of audio right now. Well, that's great. But what happens when you need 24, 4 years down the road? You're going to buy another mixer? No, you buy the mixer that you need down the road because it's going to meet your immediate needs, but it's also thinking ahead and being strategic, not tactical, in terms of buying what you're going to need for down the road. Mm-hmm. So in terms of what your cornerstone components are, by and large, this list is what I'm recommending or I'm suggesting are your cornerstones. And it generally is going to be the longest lasting piece of equipment, or what you need to be the longest lasting, or the most expensive. So projection, it's interesting. I expect that some people are going to be surprised that I put the screen instead of the projector. And the reason that I put the screen is simply because if you think about 10 to 20 year time frames, up until recently, we've seen, the screen pretty much stays the same. Mm-hmm. And you just replace the projector as you need. Now with laser projectors coming out, that could shift things quite a bit because, we're talking 20, 30,000 hours of use before you got to replace that thing. And, but here's the thing, even after that projection or that laser light source goes out, chances are the screen's going to stay there. Mm-hmm. So that's my argument for that. That's my basis for that. But again, it's focusing on overall value versus lowest price. And this gets into a stewardship discussion where oftentimes churches, especially small churches, because they have non-existent budgets a lot of the time, will focus on how much money we can save.
Mhm.
And I would challenge you to change that definition of stewardship to how much money you don't waste. Because almost 100% of the time, if you're focusing on bottom line price, you're compromising on quality and longevity or functionality. You're compromising somewhere. And a lot of times, those are places where you shouldn't be compromising. And so I would challenge you to think about, okay, if we're not wasting money, then ultimately the end goal is the same, but the mindset is different. How we approach purchase decisions is different. If you think about a church building, yes, it's like I know my slide deck or something. If you think about a church building, you're not going to say, oh, well, let's do a pole barn for our church, because generally speaking, that's probably going to be the cheapest option available, right? No, you want to build a church that's going to not only reflect who you are as a group of believers, but you want it to last. You want it to stand. You want it to be solid. You know, you don't want to have to worry about the roof caving in on you because it's not structurally sound, because you didn't want to invest in that. So if we look at church buildings, you know, churches invest in making sure those are built properly. But in a lot of other areas, including tech, we don't have that same mindset. And the question is why? So I'm not going to answer that. That's going to be a question for all of you out there to answer for yourselves. Why do we compromise in this area, but not compromise in this other one?
Great question. And I just want to kind of go back and clarify a couple things there. When you're talking about there are four main areas of the cornerstone pieces that you need to fit in there. You mentioned your audio mixer might be one of those foundational pieces. What are some other suggestions that you have of what those foundational pieces might be?
Yeah, so in the audio area, I definitely say the audio mixer. One could challenge and say that it's the microphones. And if we're talking wired microphones, okay, I could see that. But the wireless landscape has been changing so frequently over the last 20 years that it's hard for me to say, oh yeah, your wireless microphones are foundational. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily want to compromise there, but there are other options that will work depending on your environment. Mm-hmm. If you're out in the middle of rural Texas, for example, the likelihood of you being surrounded by a crowded RF environment is much less than being in, you know, downtown Houston, mm-hmm. for example. Mm-hmm. So there are environmental factors that kind of factor into that as well. In video, I'd say the production switcher. Definitely. I mean, I don't think I'm going to get much pushback on that. Cameras come and go. Mm-hmm. And then your lighting fixtures. I mean, those are 15 to 20 year kind of investment. Mm-hmm. Whereas your lighting controller can change. You could go from wired to wireless in terms of your DMX or ArtNet or SACN, however, whatever control protocol you choose mm-hmm. to use. So there's a lot of components and changes that can happen in a lighting system, but generally, once you make the investment in your lighting fixtures, you're making that for a long, long time because you anticipate they're going to last. And with lighting fixtures, I mean, you're talking 50,000 to 100,000 hours before they reach 50% brightness. So comparing like a laser projector to an LED lighting fixture is, I mean, it's almost an order of magnitude longer lifespan.
So really it's just making sure you're having good conversations with people who understand the equipment, and then having the conversations with your team to be able to figure out what do we need.
Well, yeah. And before we move on, I want to make sure that we understand the difference between this is what we want and this is what we need.
Right.
It's very easy to spend other people's money. I do it all the time as a consultant. So, but that's where the idea of stewardship and wise investment and making sure that you're spending money on the right things is so important. And it's important to understand there's no universal audio system or video or lighting or projection system that's going to be right for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you have to really factor in your environment. You have to factor in your space, what your needs are now, what your needs are 10 years down the road. It's very unlikely you're going to see a mirror image between your church and another church.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a lot of similarities, but it's okay to compare what you have to another church, but don't take what another church has and say, oh, that's what we have to have. There's an internal evaluation process that has to happen versus, oh, well, it worked for them, so that automatically means it'll work for us. Assumption is very, very dangerous.
Very true. So how do we then take all of that and implement that into your purchases?
So how do we implement foundational purchasing, right? All right. So before I get to that specifically, I do want to talk about foundational purchasing as a cog in an overall machine of achieving excellence, because that's what it is. It's a cornerstone, if you will, of AV excellence, because there's a philosophy, there's a mindset that goes into wanting to implement this. For a lot of churches, trying to implement this is going to be filled with obstacles and uphill battles, because you're talking about doing things differently. And if there's anything we know working in churches, it's that trying to do something different, something new, can often be fraught with dangers. This is the way we've always done it, that kind of mentality. So foundational purchasing kind of has a subcategory of stewardship. We've already talked about that. One of the other cornerstones is excellence versus perfection. A lot of times we get leadership. I'm sad to say that, or techs, it's not limited to leadership, but we get people in church that focus on perfection. It has to be perfect every single time. That's an unrealistic standard. Nothing is perfect this side of heaven. So why should we be trying to implement that and aim for that? It may be the thought process is that old cliche, aim for the moon, and if you miss, you'll still be among the stars. Well, yeah, that's nice. That's a nice sentiment, but the reality is when you have somebody who's pushing for perfection, they have a tendency to really demoralize the people that they're trying to inspire. When we reach for excellence, that changes the game completely, because now we have room for grace. We have room for mistakes. We have room for mercy. We have room for improvement. If the idea is we can always improve, I think the Japanese call it kaizen, is they're always improving. Mm-hmm. So how can we do it better? How can we do it, differently in order to achieve a better result? And while that might seem similar to perfection, what we're really doing is we're saying, okay, we're throwing this this goal of excellence out there, right? We don't know what that looks like. We have an idea of what we'd like to see, but let's just take this goal of excellence and let's break it down into its component parts, right? So things like having a cue to cue before every program, where everybody involved in the program gets together and they just go through the program to say, okay, this is what happens, this is where it happens, this is the tech needs, that kind of thing. So everybody's on the same page. And some people might think, oh, that's trying to produce the church service. Well, not really, because you're not saying, 2 minutes in, it's going to be this, and everybody's on an intercom. And I mean, the larger churches, certainly, they need to do that, because if they don't have that level of production, the experience is ruined. And that's what church for them is all about. It's about the experience of worship, the experience of going to church. Smaller churches, we don't need to go to that level. But it is important that if you have something different, if you have somebody entering from a different door or a different side of the platform, and the camera guy has to know where they're coming in from, because when we're talking like live streaming, I don't know, I'm getting off on a tangent here. I'll come back, I promise. But when you're talking about live streaming, okay, we have to get to the point where we're treating the live stream audience as if they are just as important as the in-person audience. And so we have to change our perspective. That's the word. We have to change our perspective so that we appreciate what their experience is like when they're watching. And if you have, a minute of dead air in between things happening on the platform, that's really not abrupt, but that's very disruptive to the online viewing experience, right? And it's not to say you've got a stage manager with the wireless intercom and the video director is the one that's actually coordinating the program. But there are things that you can do, like as somebody finishes at the microphone and they begin to exit, or get off the platform, the next person's already coming up. Mm-hmm. Just smoothing out transitions can go a long way in making a more excellent church service. So again, excellence versus perfection, and then vision casting. This is something that it's kind of unfair to church leadership and pastors because they're not necessarily trained for it. We are borrowing this from kind of corporate America, but the idea of casting a vision for the entire church to say, this is where we're going. This is, the direction that we're going in. And this is what that looks like. Paint me a picture of what that looks like, and then connect that vision to the task that I do week in, week out as a volunteer. What that does is it gives me purpose. It lets me understand how I directly support the mission and the vision. Mm-hmm. That one thing, vision casting, and that positive reinforcement, that positive feedback, sharing stories of how people out in the world, on the live stream were impacted by the message. Things like that. They're not that difficult to do. Can have enormous impact on your tech crew because it gives them purpose. And once we have purpose as techs, we'll go to the ends of the earth for you, because now we have a personal mission and we understand the part that we play. Mm-hmm. And the difference between having purpose and not purpose is if I don't have purpose, I'm going to burn out. Mm-hmm. Statistically speaking, it's going to happen. If I have purpose, I might burn out, but at least I know why I'm burning out, right? And there are other things about, guarding against burnout that we're not going to go into, but that is, in a lot of ways, what foundational purchasing is in terms of, part of a larger program.
Well, and I'm going to interject. I think a lot of those things also help show your team that you value them. Because you're supporting them, you're providing them with the opportunities to be prepared and to plan for what's coming, so that way they don't have to feel like they're rushing and like, oh, what's happening? So I think it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how do we implement it? Well, first we understand that there are 5 points in a cohesive, team built, and mission driven or vision driven tech department. Obviously, audio, video, lighting, and projection, those are a given, but there is a 5th point, and that's pastoral leadership. We need that person, that leadership, to be involved in tech. And by be involved, I don't mean calling out tech from the front. Oh, hey, we're getting some feedback here. Well, yeah, we can hear that. Thank you. We're working on it, right? Don't call tech out. If there's a technical issue, just move on. It does no good to, point a spotlight at a failure of tech. Most of the time we know the problem is there, and we're working on it. So, but this is where this idea of debriefing afterwards comes in. Being able to, it doesn't have to be a big sit down, hour long, hash it out. It's just a quick 5 minute, hey, we had this issue and this issue and this issue, let's figure out why. So it doesn't happen again. Easy, done. But it goes back to what you were saying, Stephanie, which is supporting the people and knowing that they are supported and appreciated. So I didn't really talk about how to implement it, but I will.
All right.
I think I got off on my slides a little bit, but implementing it, yeah. We are going to get into it in a minute, but I think you have another question that's going to kind of springboard me into it.
All right. So why do you think that churches in general tend to struggle with some of these principles and figuring out how to get there?
Yeah. So we can't really talk about implementing foundational purchasing until we talk about the obstacles that we're facing. And there are a few of them, and they're not necessarily small, but here's a short list of the most common obstacles that I've come across in terms of implementing not only foundational purchasing, but aiming and trying to achieve AV excellence. Obviously, there's budget. Especially for small churches, there's always this scarcity mindset of we don't have the money that we need. And that has two components to it. One is it's very rare for me to come into a church and find out that they have a decent and appropriately sized annual budget for the department for things like expendables, gaff tape, replacement light bulbs, projector bulbs, that kind of thing. But then there's the other component of how do we raise money in order to get an upgrade? Most of the time, it's like a focus for the church for the year in order to do this. Sometimes they have a donor that says, I'm tired of the projector, not working properly. So I'm going to give money in order to get a better projector or to fix the problem. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, those donations fall short of the money that's really needed in order to do it right. And oftentimes, those donations are also given in a sporadic basis. And so what happens is you get this kind of Band-Aid fix rather than a more comprehensive root cause analysis is what I'll call it, where you're really finding out, you're taking the time to really dig into the issue and say, okay, this is what's causing it. And so what you get is, let's say that you got a projector that is blinking in and out, and it's really annoying because that is annoying. Well, that could be a HDCP version mismatch, or HDCP is not supported. It could be any number of things, but let's replace the projector. Well, if it's a signal issue, then replacing the projector isn't going to change it. It's not going to fix anything. And without doing a root cause analysis, without understanding what's really causing that problem, replacing the projector in that situation, that's not even a Band-Aid fix. That's a waste of money because it's not fixing the problem. So that's budget as a category. That's one of the biggest obstacles. The other is training. I think we can all agree that training is an area that is often overlooked. And I'm not necessarily going to cast shade or throw shade on leadership on this. A lot of times in churches, the techs themselves are not being proactive in going and learning the things that they should. And that's for a number of reasons. One, they don't know where to start looking. Two, they don't know what to research because they don't know enough to know what they need. What are the search terms? What's the piece of equipment? The audio controlled thing. Well, that's an audio mixer, right? So, but there are so many free resources out there. But the other issue is time, right? Something that has really come up in terms of an obstacle personally for a lot of people over the last 10 years has been time. You know, we spend more and more and more time on social media and on our devices and watching cat videos, to use the cliche, rather than dedicating time to better our understanding and better ourselves. And, you know, we need to evaluate, why do we do what we do as techs? Why do we serve? Does it make us feel good? Is it something we're passionate about? Is it because we got recruited a number of years ago and we just we don't really like it, but we do it because it's an expectation that we're trying to meet? I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. But the bottom line is, if you're going to serve in church tech, then there needs to be a training component, whether you're being trained by somebody in the department that knows what they're doing, whether you're going out and being proactive and teaching yourself, whether you're bringing the church leadership, bring somebody like me in to come and teach you on your equipment. And that's really one of the biggest obstacles, is finding training online that is specific to your equipment. But we'll talk about that, because we're going to go through the obstacles first, and then we're going to talk about solutions. And then, you know, the other kind of one is, the other obstacle that we've talked about already is lack of vision and mission from leadership, that vision casting component to say, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we're going. And this is your piece of it. And so what you get is, you know, people that have been running the audio mixer for 25 years, they become a fixture, essentially, just like the mixer, right? Because they're always there. That's how they go to church. And, you know, it's interesting. I just mentioned this briefly. I actually had to step down from being a tech director at my old church, because I realized that I couldn't enjoy church without doing something in tech. I'd forgotten how to do church as a regular attendee, you know, because I'm always looking and listening for, oh, that needs to, you know, improvement, because that's the mindset that I have. And so it's very difficult for me to even go and sit through a church service, you know, at a client or when I'm traveling, and not start identifying, oh, well, you know, the EQ's off there, or that was a upcut microphone, or the projection has issues. So I'm actually kind of on sabbatical right now from church, because I need to retrain my brain to like be able to switch that off so that I can actually worship and commune with God when I'm at church.
Yeah, I've been there before too.
Okay. Now, let's go into more detail with budget. One of the big issues with budget in terms of it being an obstacle is it's so easy to overspend. It's so easy to just spend money, to, again, that want versus need argument or discussion, in that if you don't know what you need, then you probably should not be spending money. I have this other philosophy that is, know what you don't know, and surround yourself with people that do know what you don't know, because nobody can know it all. I don't know it all. You know, people call me an expert. Well, it just means I know a little bit more than other people. But I don't know everything, you know, so it's important to know your limitations. If you're an audio guy, or if you're an audio operator, and that's what you know it really well, don't pass yourself off as somebody who also knows lighting or video. You know, and a lot of times leadership or church boards, they utilize volunteers that they already have to say, well, we want to get a video system and live streaming going. So Mr. Audio person, can you tell us what we need? Well, just because they know audio doesn't mean that translates over into video. And so oftentimes what you'll see is that situation, they'll make a recommendation of, you know, this is the equipment package we need, but it's filled with things that they either don't need, are wrong, or won't do what they need it to do. I've had, just in the last year, I've had 3 or 4 different situations where a church created their own bill of materials, if you will, their own package. and sent it to me for evaluation. And I'm like, for the same money, this is actually what you need.
Mm-hmm.
And because oftentimes what'll happen is you'll get, a church, they'll buy the equipment package, they'll get it in, and it doesn't work. Right now we're back into that stewardship. You're wasting money because you didn't, admit to yourself that you don't know what you're doing. And for some reason, there's this thought process that bringing in somebody like me, a system integrator or a consultant, to help in that planning process costs money. And I mean, I do all that for free because I want to make sure that churches get what they need the first time. And, if you want to buy the equipment through me, that's fine. I'll be honest and transparent. That's where I make my money. If you want me to install it, that's fine. I can do that too. If you want to self-install, however you want to do it, let's figure out a way to work together. And I'd say that most integrators are going to work that way. Some of the larger ones, they might be a little more restrictive, let's say. But please, if you don't know what you're doing, reach out for help. Help is available. So I'd much rather spend the time making sure that what you're getting what you need, rather than say, well, how can I make money off of this situation? So the other issue is trust. So leadership can have issues with trusting their tech departments. So just like it's easy to overspend because of all the reasons I said before, we have the flip side of that, where I've experienced this directly, unfortunately. No prophet is welcome in their hometown kind of thing. So we're going to commission you as our tech person to go and create a proposal. And then you're going to spend, if you're doing it right, you're going to spend weeks or months. In my case, I did 8 months. Having the conversations with all the stakeholders and putting your package together and then submitting it. And then you turn around and hire an outside vendor to come in and basically do the same thing. So that is, if you want to kill your tech department, do that. You either trust them or you don't. And if you don't trust them enough to spend the money that they're telling you that you need to spend, then don't commission them to create a proposal for you. Go out and find somebody like me to do it. The third issue always is the limited funds, right? The church has at its core a certain amount of money that it brings in every year through tithes and offerings. And if you're denominational, however the denomination spreads out the monies that they collect. So there's a lot that has to happen with those funds. And if you come in and say, hey, I need 25 grand for a new lighting system, well, that's going to be a hard sell if the total combined budget is, $75,000. So there is a planning component to it, right? This society that we live in is all about, got to have it now. I want it now. Whereas I think the godly approach to it, the good stewardship approach to it is, let's put a plan together on paper. We get all the research out of the way. And then this is the dollar figure that we have in order to get what we need, right? Utilizing that, where are we going to go in 10 years, that kind of thing. And then you can fundraise for that number. And, you always want to make sure that you add some cushion into that figure, because you don't want the exact dollar amount to be the money that you're raising for, because prices change, products are discontinued all the time. And then there's some products that you have to just build in a lead time on. For example, right now, PTZ cameras, robotic cameras, and live stream encoders, you're looking 4 to 8 weeks in terms of back order. So
yeah, they've got pretty popular lately.
Yeah, obviously, right now is kind of extenuating circumstances, if you will, but these are things you can't predict months in advance. And so it's important to understand that, you know, you might spec a camera, for example. We want this camera, but have some fudge room in there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if you're working with an integrator like me, I'm always going to give you like retail pricing. So if you go out and you buy it on your own, this is what you're going to pay,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you'll get pricing that's direct through me. But I would say take that retail pricing number and use that, you know, because you might have to go out and buy it on your own. You don't know what's going to happen to your consultant. Maybe they have a medical emergency, you know, maybe they have a situation where they go off grid for whatever reason. So just plan your contingencies. And then just understand that every department wants money. You know, you're not the only one. Just because you're tech doesn't mean that you automatically go to the head of the line. So appreciate that other departments are undergoing similar discussions. You know, how can we improve? Children, youth, mission, evangelism, they all require money. So the next obstacle is, I can't see it.
It says lack of training.
Yes, thank you, training. Yeah, I have this. The host has asked you to start your video window over my slide there. So, and because I'm full screen, I don't have a mouse. Anyway, okay, lack of training. So why is that an obstacle? Well, because a lot of people think that it costs money. We've gone over, you know, options that are available to you that don't cost money. I provided CFX with some links to training resources, some of which are free. So the idea that it takes money, yes, it can. You know, it's going to cost you money to bring somebody like me in to do it professionally. But it's probably less money than you think. I'll just put that out there. The second is it takes time. Regardless of whether you're doing it for free or you're bringing somebody like me in, it's going to require a commitment of time. And you know, you can bring in a professional and have a 6-hour all day kind of seminar, but you know, record that. You know, get the slide deck. Make sure that you have any handouts, or have somebody take minutes, or you know, do something so that you have that as a resource in the future. I mean, you're spending money on it. You know, if you're going to bring somebody like me in, you might as well record it so that you have that basis of reference for not only your current people to go back to, you know, to say, hey, you know, I remember he said something about this. Well, go and make it available, but also for future volunteers that come in, because conceptually, I can talk concepts for 6 hours, you know, all day long. But taking those concepts and applying it directly to your situation and your system, that's a totally different thing, you know? So it's important to have the concepts, the conceptual understanding as a foundation to build on, but you need to build on that foundation. You can't just say, oh, I understand the concept, but I don't understand the direct application of how that applies to our systems. So if you're going to commit to training, then you need to commit to taking the time to do it. The other issue that I've come across, fortunately, it's not that common, but it does exist, is just the lack of desire to learn. You get that guy who's been in the audio booth for 20 years, and you're coming in and replacing it with a digital audio mixer, and all they know is analog audio mixing. It's a totally different world. And if they're unwilling to learn the new mixer because, oh, I understand audio mixing, well, you might understand, again, that's conceptually. You understand how to do it on an analog mixer. How to do it on a digital mixer is completely different. Yes, conceptually, you understand, you know, how to EQ, and, you know, maybe you understand how to do compression and a gate and a limiter. Maybe you understand how to route audio into subgroups and aux sends and that kind of thing. But how you do that on a digital mixer is very different, particularly because instead of all this outboard gear, now everything's in the mixer itself. So understanding how to access and manipulate all that. And then you've got, unfortunately, those people that are like, it's too hard, and I can't help that. If that's an attitude thing, if you're not willing to learn and you think it's too hard, then you're probably not the right person to be in that position. So we're going to speed through the next one. So what is affecting leadership? That casting a vision and mission. Well, let's be honest. A lot of pastors and pastoral leadership are just overburdened these days. They're having to take on a lot of roles that they may not be not only accustomed to taking on, but also trained for. So there are a lot of demands on their time. So I say, how do we overcome that? How do we help them? How can we help them delegate that? How can we take some of that load off by encouraging people to use, free resources or other resources? Should pastors be counseling couples? Well, I'm not going to open that can of worms, but that can be a huge time draw. So is that better suited for somebody else? Do you have somebody else who's actually trained in doing that? So another issue that I've seen is the faction system in churches. It's a church I'm very familiar with where the music faction is very powerful. And it was so powerful it actually got a pastor fired because they didn't like the direction that the pastor was taking the church, even though the church was growing by leaps and bounds. And I think they were up to 4 services that weekend. They had a cafe down in the basement. They had, like pastries and fruit and like out on tables in the lobby it was awesome every weekend. But so beware of, factionalism in your church. I don't see that there being a need for that, and I don't see it as being overly healthy. And then, unfortunately, there is a lack of decision-making and just plain leadership and saying, this is the direction that we're going. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade on leaders, but it is an issue, and that can affect all areas in a church, not just tech. So, I'm going to speed through these because we're running out of time. So here are some ideas that I've come up with for solutions. So budget, reprioritize or modify the budget so that it's simplified. So I know a lot of churches, they'll just have three funds or budgets. They'll have general, evangelism, and youth. Everything will fit into one of those 3 categories. I'm not saying that's right for your church. I'm just saying it's an option. The big thing, though, is create a master plan. And this goes, again, into vision casting. Where are we going to be in 10 years? And if you know where you're going to end up, then you can make the plan for how you're going to get there. So creating a master plan of, okay, well, we can't upgrade everything right now because, we can't afford it. We don't have the time, whatever it is. But having that step-by-step plan to say, okay, we're going to do audio first, we're going to do lighting next, and then we're going to do video and then projection. Having that plan, if you need that kind of a plan, gives everybody a direction, gives everybody a game plan. And then differentiate between your annual costs for your tech department and your kind of upgrade costs. And it's important to do that because I remember being in a church where the annual tech budget was like $60. And I'm like, no, that's not okay. So, be realistic about where your costs are. Don't get greedy, be accurate. But you also need to be fair. Mm-hmm. So, take a hard look at your expendables. What's the gear? What's the equipment? What's the accessories, cabling, whatever it is that you're going through on a regular basis, throw that in there, pad it by 10%, call it good. Mm-hmm. All right. Training. Boom. Here you go. Facebook groups. I've lost count of how many there are for church tech. There's, just go and do a search. There's lots of them. Look up YouTube creators. There's a lot of content being produced on a regular basis. You can find reviews for many, many products. You can, and not only by influencers or creators, but by end users, to say this is an unbiased review. And it's important that you understand the difference between a sponsored and a non-sponsored review. A sponsored review is likely going to be very favorable to the product, whereas a non-sponsored, that's the kind I tend to gravitate towards, because it's going to be more honest. It's going to be more straightforward, and it's not going to be so skewed. There's manufacturer provided training. So if you have a particular product, you have probably a somewhat good chance that there is some training or video content available by the manufacturer for that. There's trade magazines, Technologies for Worship magazine, not that I'm biased, and church production. Those are kind of the two main ones. And then you can also hire a professional like me to come in and do training at the conceptual level or at the product specific level to say, this is how you use this piece of equipment. And then vision casting and mission. Again, evaluate ways to lighten the load on the pastors, initiate the vision casting conversation by asking questions. Where are we going as a church? What is the mission or the vision? If they can't define that, then work with them to try and figure out if you can. Be proactive about it, help them out, help them help you, right? And then, once you have defined that, then you can clarify and say, how can our department help achieve that, right? Just have that conversation. And sometimes you got to be honest and be aware that there are toxic leaders, and it's possible that you may have to leave the church that you're in order to get out of a toxic situation. Burnout is a real thing. And I know of one situation where a church, fairly large church, has multiple pastors, and they've all had to go to the hospital because they fainted or passed out because of the stress and the load being put on them by the lead pastor. So
wow, that
is a toxic situation.
Yeah,
that's not okay. So I think that's everything.
Okay. I just have one last question.
Yeah.
About how the world has changed so much this year in 2020 with the pandemic and everything, and situations that churches are finding themselves in right now. Do you have any tips, pointers, suggestions to them on how to go about starting some of these conversations in churches now?
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea that, we're in the new normal, well, that's true. We're in a situation that is kind of unprecedented in that we've seen a massive, massive shift to live streaming in the church environment. And in terms of tips, it shifts the conversation quite a bit in terms of achieving AV excellence, because we're not so much focused on achieving AV excellence for the in-person congregation any longer. We're now expanding that, not necessarily by our choice, but by the situation that we're in. We're extending that to include live streaming. And what does that look like? Well, having conversations about your lighting, I see a lot of churches and church techs asking the question, what camera do I need that's good, that's going to deliver an awesome picture or a good picture for live streaming? Well, the answer is that we need to look at your lighting first, because proper lighting with a cheaper camera is generally going to produce a better image than no lighting or poor lighting with a great camera. So you can always change the camera later, right? But remember, we're talking about foundational purchasing, right? Those foundational pieces, lighting is one of those. And if you light for video properly, it's going to look good for everybody. If you light for the human eye, then chances are the camera is not going to like it. So understanding perception, how people perceive your live stream or your church online is a big thing. And so we're seeing a shift to the virtual. right? I mean, that's not news, but how do we achieve excellence in the virtual world? That's going to be specific to your church. But, hopefully I've outlined some ideas in terms of, conversations you can have, questions that you could ask if you haven't asked them already or been asked is, from the standpoint of going live, how do we want to achieve that? What's best for our situation? You got to look at personnel that are available. You've got to look at technology that's available. You have to look at things like your internet connection.
Mm-hmm.
Can it support live streaming? Are you better served to live stream, or are you better served to pre-produce the content and post it for people to consume on the day of?
Mm-hmm.
There's no one right answer for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but being able to have the conversation to say, look, it's better for us to pre-produce, given that, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the personnel to do this live. Our internet connection is not going to support what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not the availability of an internet connection that can come to the church itself that will support that. There's so many variables in terms of live streaming, and how do you get audio in? Mixing for virtual is very different than mixing for the live environment. So these are a lot of struggles that a lot of churches are having right now, and I think it's important that we talk about that, but it's also important to understand that there are resources available for churches to have those conversations in a space that is very understanding and very supportive.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're going to kind of wrap things up. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in real quick. If not, if you'd like to reach out to Tim later on, you can check out his website at Tomato. I always want to say tomato. I don't know.
I get that a lot. People are like, is it tomato or tomato? And I'm like, well, you don't call it a potato, do you?
It makes sense.
So
so it's tomatosystems.com. You can also email him at info@tomatosystems.com.
Oh my goodness. I totally put that wrong. It is info. Sorry guys. I have two companies, and the other company's email address is Tim at. So my apologies. It is info. Listen to Stephanie. Don't read what you see there.
Good times. All right. Well, thank you, Tim. And thank you to all of you who have attended today.
Any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions right now, so we'll assume that there aren't any. But if there are any, please feel free to still throw them in there, and we'll ask them as we get there. In the meantime, I'll share a little CFX update with everyone. Our conference and expo that was the live event in Dallas, we have unfortunately had to postpone that to September 21st and 22nd of next year, 2021, just due to the rising numbers of COVID cases in the Texas region. CFX Virtual Network, however, will be launching this fall and periodically throughout the remainder of the coming year. So for this fall, join us for 60 days of live and on-demand sessions, peer-to-peer networking, and connection times with leading manufacturers. I'm going to tell you, I've seen the demo of the platform that we're building to be able to do this, and the opportunities are better than any I've seen out there in any other virtual conference. So it really is going to kind of feel like you're at the live event while seated, oh my goodness, while seated in your own home or office. So and you can learn with your team on your own time from the best in the industry. Registration costs will be $49 for the entire 60 days. And you can check us out at churchfacilitiesexpo.com for registration information, which will be coming out later this month. All right, I think that's it. And thank you again, Tim. Thank you to everyone who's here, and have a wonderful 4th of July weekend coming up.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, everybody.
We'll see ya. Bye.